I spent 23 years teaching biology, and in all that time, I never once considered that the most profitable laboratory I would ever run would be a 30 by 40 foot patch of dirt in my own backyard. Last year, I tracked every single dollar I spent on seeds, soil amendments, and water. And then I tracked every dollar I saved at the grocery store and earned at my local farmer's market. The net result was just over $4,200 in value from 20 raised beds. Now, that is not $1 million, and I want to be honest with you about that right up front. But when you understand the per square foot economics of certain vegetables and you scale even modestly, the math starts to get very interesting very fast. Today, I am walking you through 20 vegetables that consistently deliver the highest return on investment for home gardeners based on my own records, university extension data, and the real world experience of growers I trust. Some of these you have probably already grown, others might surprise you. And the very last one on this list is the vegetable that genuinely changed how I think about home garden profitability after years of focusing on the wrong crops entirely. I will also share a bonus technique after the main list, a simple planning strategy I stumbled onto almost by accident that can squeeze an extra 30% productivity out of any garden bed. So stick around for that. Before we dive in, there is one unifying principle behind every vegetable on this list, and it took me an embarrassingly long time to figure it out. Profitable home gardening is not about growing the most pounds of food. It is about growing the most value per square foot per unit of time. That means we want crops that are expensive at the grocery store, that produce over a long harvest window, that occupy vertical space rather than just horizontal space, or that mature so quickly you can get multiple successions in a single season. Once I started thinking about my garden through that lens rather than just planting whatever looked good in the seed catalogue, everything changed. So here is what I have learned works, starting with one of the simplest and most underestimated crops out there. The first vegetable that really opened my eyes was fresh herbs, specifically basil. Now, I know technically this list says vegetables, but if you're selling or saving money, culinary herbs function the same way in your garden economics. A single packet of Genovese basil seeds costs about $3. One healthy basil plant, properly pruned, will produce roughly 2 to 3 cups of leaves per week for 4 months. At the grocery store, a tiny clamshell of basil runs $3 to $4 and gives you maybe a quarter cup. When I finally did that math on a Tuesday afternoon, I actually laughed out loud at how much money I'd been handing over to the produce section. Plant basil in full sun, pinch it above the second set of leaves every week. Or 2 to encourage branching, and a single 4x8 raised bed can hold 12 to 16 plants spaced about 8 to 10 inches apart. I tracked one bed of basil last summer, and the grocery store equivalent value was over $600 from a $3 seed packet. That is not an exaggeration. That is arithmetic. Now, what pairs beautifully with basil, both in the garden and on the profitability chart, is tomatoes, but not just any tomatoes. I wasted several seasons growing big beefsteak varieties because that is what my father-in-law always grew. They taste wonderful, sure, but from a pure dollars per square foot perspective, cherry and grape tomatoes are significantly more profitable. Here is why. A single indeterminate cherry tomato plant like Sun Gold or Super Sweet 100 will produce anywhere from 10 to 20 pounds of fruit over a season if you trellis it vertically and keep it fed. At the farmer's market, cherry tomatoes routinely sell for $4 to $6 per pint. And at the grocery store, a single pint of organic cherry tomatoes is $3.50 to $5. The key is growing them vertically on a sturdy stake or trellis at least 6 feet tall and pruning the suckers below the first fruit cluster so the plant puts energy into production rather than foliage. I did not learn this until my 4th season of growing tomatoes, and the difference was night and day. My yield nearly doubled just from proper pruning and trellising. The third crop that belongs on every profitability list is lettuce, but grown as cut and come again rather than full heads. This is one of those techniques I wish someone had told me when I started, because I spent 2 years pulling out entire heads of romaine and then waiting 6 weeks for the next crop. When you instead harvest the outer leaves at about 4 to 6 inches tall, cutting about an inch above the crown, the plant keeps producing new leaves from the center. A single 4x8 bed of loose leaf lettuce, varieties like red sails or black seeded Simpson planted in rows 4 inches apart, can give you a usable harvest every single week for 2 to 3 months before the plants bolt. I have calculated that one bed of cut and come again lettuce replaces roughly $12 to $15 per week in grocery store salad mix. Over a spring season alone, that is close to $150 from one bed with almost no effort. If you're finding this useful, I would love for you to subscribe so you do not miss the next video where I go deeper into succession planting schedules that keep these profitable crops producing all season long. All right, let us keep going, because some of the best ones are still ahead. Now, here is one that took me 3 seasons to really appreciate, and it is peppers, specifically hot peppers. I used to grow only bell peppers because those are what I cooked with most often. But from a profitability standpoint, hot peppers are in a completely different league. A single habanero plant can produce 40 to 50 peppers over a season. Dried and ground into powder or fermented into hot sauce, the value per plant is extraordinary. One of my gardening friends sells small batch habanero hot sauce at the local farmer's market for $12 a bottle, and she gets roughly 8 to 10 bottles from just 4 plants. Even if you're not selling, consider what you spend on specialty hot sauces and dried chili flakes over a year. The key is starting seeds indoors about 8 to 10 weeks before your last frost date and giving them consistently warm soil, at least 65 degrees Fahrenheit at the root zone. I use a simple seedling heat mat that cost about $20, and it has paid for itself 100 times over. This next crop is one that genuinely surprised me with its economics, and it is green onions or scallions. I almost did not include these because they seem so humble, but that is exactly why they are so profitable. A bundle of 6 green onions at the grocery store costs $1 to $1.50. You can grow over 200 in a single square foot if you use the tight spacing method, planting sets or seeds about half an inch apart in all directions. They mature in as little as 60 days, and you can get 3 to 4 successions in a single growing season in most zones. Do the math, and that 1 square foot can replace over $40 in grocery store scallions per year. The trick I learned the hard way is to not pull the entire plant. Cut them about an inch above the soil line, and most varieties will regrow at least once or twice, sometimes 3 times. I felt genuinely foolish when I realized I'd been yanking them out by the roots for years. Now, if we are talking about speed to harvest and dollar value, you absolutely have to consider microgreens. I resisted growing these for a long time because they seemed like a trendy restaurant thing and not a real crop. I was wrong. A 10 by 20 inch tray of sunflower microgreens costs about $2 in seeds and soil, takes 7 to 12 days to grow, and produces a yield that would cost you $8 to $15 at a health food store or farmer's market. My retired neighbour grows microgreens on 2-wire shelving units in his garage under simple shop lights, 4-foot T8 fluorescent bulbs, and he clears about $300 a month selling to 3 local restaurants. Now, that is a more commercial approach, but even for home savings, the return per square foot per day of growing time is hard to beat with any other crop. Speaking of fast turnaround, radishes deserve a spot on this list. They are ready in as few as 25 days for varieties like Cherry Bell, and you can tuck them into gaps between slower growing crops. I plant a short row of radishes every 2 weeks from early spring through late fall, and they fill what I call the dead space in my garden, those little pockets between transplants that would otherwise just be bare soil. A packet of seeds costs under $2 and gives you months of harvest. The profitability here is less about high dollar value per unit and more about the fact that radishes turn otherwise wasted space and time into food. It is found money, and I love found money. This next one is a crop I avoided for years because I thought it needed too much space, and that is pole beans. Not bush beans, pole beans specifically. Bush beans give you one concentrated harvest and then they are done. Pole beans grown on a simple 8-foot trellis will produce continuously for 2 to 3 months. Varieties like Kentucky Wonder or Vortex can yield up to 15 pounds per plant over a season. And here is the detail that really matters for profitability: they grow vertically. A 4 by 8 bed with a trellis on the north end can produce as many beans as a much larger horizontal planting. And you can still grow lettuce or radishes underneath in the shade they cast. I wish I had understood vertical growing from the start. It is really the key to high value per square foot. Now, let me talk about one that most people overlook entirely, and that is garlic. I know garlic takes patience. You plant it in the fall and harvest it the following summer, roughly 8 to 9 months later. But the economics are remarkable. A single head of organic garlic at the grocery store runs 50 cents to $1. A single clove, which costs essentially nothing if you save your own seed stock, produces one full head. I plant about 200 cloves every October, spaced 4 to 6 inches apart in rows 8 inches apart, and by July I harvest 200 heads of garlic that would cost me over $100 at the store. And here is the bonus. The garlic scapes you trim off in late spring are a gourmet ingredient that sell for $8 to $12 per pound at farmers markets. So you are getting 2 profitable harvests from one planting. The mistake I made in my early garlic years was planting grocery store garlic, which is often treated with growth inhibitors. Always buy seed garlic from a reputable supplier or save your own from a previous harvest. Here is a crop that I started growing specifically because I got tired of paying $6 for a tiny package at the store, and that is fresh spinach. Baby spinach in those plastic tubs is one of the most overpriced items in the produce section relative to how easy it is to grow. Bloomsdale Long Standing is my favourite variety for spring and fall because it resists bolting better than most. Direct sow seeds, half an inch deep and 1 inch apart in rows 6 inches apart, and you can start harvesting baby leaves in as little as 25 to 30 days. One 4x4 raised bed can produce the equivalent of about 10 of those $6 grocery store containers over a single spring season. That is $60 from a $3 packet of seeds and a few minutes of watering. Now, this next crop is going to sound counterintuitive for profitability, but hear me out, because the data changed my mind. It is zucchini. I know everyone jokes about having too much zucchini, and that is exactly the point. A single zucchini plant produces 6 to 10 pounds of fruit per week at peak production. That is an absurd output for the space it occupies. The profitability angle here is not just fresh eating, it is value-added processing. Shredded zucchini freezes beautifully for baking. Spiralized zucchini noodles replace $4 to $5 packages of store-bought zoodles. And if you pick them small, at 6 to 8 inches, they command premium prices at farmers markets because the flavor and texture are far superior. The mistake most growers make, and I certainly made it, is letting the fruit get too large, which signals the plant to slow down production. Harvest early and often, and a single plant becomes an absolute production machine. 2 plants are enough for most families. 3 if you want to share or sell. Let me shift gears to something with a much higher per unit value, and that is specialty salad greens. I am talking about arugula, mizuna, tatsoi, and mache. These crops are insanely easy to grow. Most are ready in 30 to 40 days. And at the grocery store, they are sold as specialty salad mix for $8 to $12 per pound. I grow a simple mesclun blend in a shallow raised bed, broadcasting seeds densely and cutting them at the baby leaf stage with scissors. 1 harvest, 1 bed, 1 pass. With the scissors gives me enough salad greens for 2 weeks of dinners. When I calculated the per harvest value against what I would pay at the upscale grocery store near my house, I realized this single bed was saving me over $15 every 2 weeks. That is close to $400 a year from one bed that takes about 5 minutes to maintain each week. Now, here is where it gets really interesting. Cucumbers, especially pickling varieties, are a profitability powerhouse that most people undervalue. A single packet of National Pickling cucumber seeds can produce enough fruit to make 20 to 30 jars of pickles over a season. A jar of quality pickles at the store costs $4 to $7. You do the math, and suddenly a $3 seed packet has produced over $100 worth of preserved food that lasts a year or more on the shelf. The key to cucumber profitability is trellising. Always trellis your cucumbers vertically. It saves space, improves air circulation, which reduces powdery mildew and makes harvesting effortless. I use a simple A-frame trellis made from 2 by 4s and wire mesh, and it cost me about $15 to build 5 years ago. Still going strong. Kale is the next one, and I will be honest, I resisted growing kale for years because I thought it was just a health food trend. That was my bias showing, and it cost me money. Lacinato kale, also called dinosaur kale or Tuscan kale, is one of the most productive and long-lasting crops you can grow. A single plant will produce harvestable leaves for 6 to 8 months if you start it in early spring and carry it through fall. At the grocery store, a small bunch of organic kale costs $3 to $4. A row of 6 plants in a 4-foot space will replace that purchase every single week for half the year. The secret I learned from a market gardener is to always harvest from the bottom up, taking the oldest leaves first and leaving at least 8 to 10 leaves on the plant at all times. Do that consistently, and the plant just keeps growing taller and producing more leaves from the crown. This is a good time to talk about something most gardening profitability lists completely ignore, which is Swiss chard. I almost ignored it myself until I saw what it was selling for at the farmer's market, $4 for a small bunch. Swiss chard, specifically bright lights, or rainbow varieties, produces continuously for 4 to 5 months from a single planting. It handles heat better than spinach, handles cold better than most greens, and it is genuinely beautiful in the garden with those bright red, yellow, and orange stems. I plant mine 8 inches apart in a block pattern and start harvesting outer stalks when they reach about 8 to 10 inches tall. One 8-foot row provides all the cooking greens my wife and I can eat, plus enough to share with the neighbours for an entire season. Now here is a crop that requires some patience and vertical thinking, but the payoff is substantial. Sugar snap peas. A packet of sugar snap or super sugar snap seeds costs about $3. Provide them with a 6-foot trellis, plant them an inch deep and 2 inches apart in early spring as soon as the soil can be worked. And within 60 to 70 days, you are harvesting handfuls of peas that cost $4 to $5 per pound at the grocery store, 1/8. Foot row can produce 8 to 10 pounds over a 4 to 6 week harvest window. The key that took me a while to figure out is that you must pick them every single day or every other day at most. Once the peas inside the pod start to get starchy and round, the plant interprets its job as done and slows production. Keep picking and it keeps flowering. This next one might raise some eyebrows, but it has earned its place. Summer squash, specifically patty pan varieties. They are less common than zucchini at the grocery store, which means they command a premium at farmers markets, often $3 to $4 per pound compared to $2 for regular zucchini. They are just as productive, just as easy to grow, and the unique flying saucer shape makes them a conversation starter at any market table. I grow a variety called Sunburst, which is a golden yellow patty pan, and I consistently sell out before any of my other crops when I bring them to our neighbourhood swap. Okay, we are getting to the final stretch, and these last few are where the real surprises are. Beets might not seem glamorous, but they are a dual income crop. You harvest the root and you harvest the greens. Beet greens alone sell for $3 to $4 a bunch at farmers markets, and they are ready to start harvesting as thinnings just 3 weeks after planting. The roots are ready in about 50 to 60 days. Varieties like Kyoja, with its beautiful candy stripe interior, or golden beets fetch premium prices because they look stunning. Plant seeds 1 inch apart and thin to 3 inches, eating the thinnings as your first harvest. I get roughly 3 successions of beets in my Zone 7 garden each year, which means one 4x8 bed produces beets from April through November. Now, second to last on this list, and this one genuinely caught me off guard when I ran the numbers. Fresh herbs again, but this time I am talking about cilantro and dill grown specifically for their seeds, which are coriander and dill seed. This is a trick I learned from a permaculture friend. You let the plants bolt, which most gardeners treat as a failure, and then you harvest the seed heads. Organic coriander seed sells for about $8 to $12 per pound. Dill seed is similar. A 4-foot row of cilantro that you let go to seed will produce a surprising quantity. And you did essentially zero work after the initial planting because bolting is exactly what you wanted the plant to do. I used to rip out bolted cilantro in frustration. Now I let it flower, which also attracts beneficial insects, and then I collect the seeds. It completely changed my relationship with that crop. And finally, here's the one I told you about at the beginning, the vegetable that genuinely changed how I think about home garden profitability. It is asparagus. Now, I can hear some of you thinking, Steve, asparagus takes 3 years before you get a real harvest. And you are absolutely right. I delayed planting asparagus for over a decade because I did not want to wait. That was one of the biggest financial mistakes in my entire gardening career. Here is what I finally understood after reading research from the University of California Cooperative Extension. A well-maintained asparagus bed will produce for 20 to 30 years. 20 to 30 years from a single planting. Once established, a row of 25 asparagus crowns, which costs about $30 to $40 to purchase, will produce roughly 10 to 15 pounds of spears per season. At the grocery store, fresh asparagus runs $3 to $6 per pound. At farmers markets, early season asparagus sells for even more. That means a single established bed is worth $50 to $90 per year every year for decades, with almost no ongoing cost beyond a top dressing of compost in the fall and a good thick layer of mulch. The total lifetime value of a 25 crown asparagus planting, using conservative estimates, is over $1,000 from a $40 initial investment. No other vegetable I've grown comes close to that kind of long-term return on investment. The lesson here is one I should have known from my years of teaching science. The most powerful force in nature is not speed, it is compounding over time. Plant your asparagus bed this fall. Your future self will thank you every single spring for the next quarter century. I only wish I had done it sooner. Now, before we wrap up, let me quickly address a few common mistakes I see gardeners make when they are trying to maximize profitability, because I made all of these myself. The first one is growing only what you like to eat without considering what is actually expensive at the store. I love potatoes. I grew potatoes for years, but potatoes cost about $1 per pound at the grocery store and take up a lot of space and time to grow. When I shifted that same space to salad greens and herbs, my savings tripled. The better approach is to prioritize crops where the price gap between homegrown and store-bought is the largest. The second mistake is not succession planting. Most gardeners plant everything at once in spring and then have a massive glut followed by nothing. Succession planting, which means sowing a new short row of the same crop every 2 to 3 weeks, gives you continuous harvests and continuous value. I stagger my lettuce, radish, and spinach plantings on a 2-week cycle, and I have not had a gap in production since I started doing it. The third mistake is ignoring preservation. 100 pounds of tomatoes all ripening in the same week is not profitable if half of them rot on the counter. Learning to can, freeze, dehydrate, or ferment your harvest extends the economic value of your garden across the entire year. I invested about $80 in a basic water bath canning setup 6 years ago, and it has enabled me to preserve several $100s worth of food every single season since. Now, here is that bonus tip I promised you at the beginning. This is something I call relay planting, and it is different from succession planting. With relay planting, you transplant your next crop directly into the bed about 2 weeks before you remove the current crop. For example, when my spring lettuce is starting to look a little tired in late May, I tuck tomato transplants in between the lettuce rows. By the time I pull the lettuce out a couple weeks later, the tomatoes already have a 2-week head start. This essentially eliminates the dead time between crops, and in my experience, it adds an extra 30 to 40 days of productive growing to each bed over the course of a season. A study from Cornell University found that relay planting systems can increase annual bed productivity by 25 to 35% compared to sequential planting. I discovered this technique in an old 1970s intensive gardening manual, and it was one of those moments where I thought, why is no one talking about this? Now I relay plant almost every bed transition in my garden, and the cumulative effect on my harvest totals has been substantial. If any of these vegetables or techniques resonated with you, I would genuinely appreciate it if you would subscribe. I put out a new video every week where we go deeper into the science and the practical economics of growing food at home. And I would love to hear from you in the comments. Which of these 20 crops are you most excited to try? Or is there a profitable crop you have been growing that I missed? I am always learning, and some of the best tips I've picked up have come directly from viewers who have been gardening far longer than I have. You know, we started today with a simple number, $4,200 of value from one backyard. That number is real and it is achievable, but only when you grow the right crops in the right way. Plant smart, track your results, and let the garden do the math for you. Happy gardening, and I will see you in the next one.